Okay. Hello again. My name is Jana Schroeder, and I'm really excited that so many folks have jumped on today for this meeting to talk about ideas that can help blind people who are coders or who want to learn to be coders or developers or programmers or whatever term you want to use. So as some of you may know, I have applied for the Holman Prize, or I've made a pitch for it. Um, but that doesn't necessarily limit what we do or what others of you may decide to do aside from what I may do. But I'll explain a little bit more about that. I want to just quickly say my thoughts of an agenda this afternoon. Um, I thought that we could start out with some introductions. Maybe many of you already know one another, but I don't know you, and I'm guessing that there are people who don't know some of the people at least on this call. Then I'd like to have kind of a discussion or brainstorm about needs that you have or you had in terms of learning to code or being a professional coder. And then after we've kind of talked about the needs, I'd like to do another brainstorm of possible kinds of solutions to that problems or resources that you would want to see created. And then I'm going to ask for some input around the Holman Prize and what would you do if you had $25,000 in a year to put toward this project. And then finally, we'll do a little bit of where do we go from here and next steps and and I'll try to have that fit into our hour and a half that we are scheduled to go this afternoon. So with that said, I would like to ask folks to do some intros, and I'm going to ask you if you would to share 5 different pieces of information. I know that sounds like a lot, and I can prompt you, or you don't have to answer all of these, but here's what I'm thinking: that you share your name and where you're calling from, that you share if you're blind, partially sighted, sighted, however you identify yourself in terms of your vision. And if your vision was different when you learned to code, if you're willing to share that. The third piece is just a little bit about your coding history. How did you learn? Did you get a degree? Are you self-taught? Something else? And are you now, or have you ever been employed as a coder or a programmer? And then the languages or environments or so forth that you primarily use in your coding. So just sort of, you don't have to answer all those, but again, just a little history about you and coding. 4 is what, if any, type of adaptive software and equipment that you use um, as a blind person. And lastly, why did you come to this meeting? So those are the 5 areas. I'm going to start and say for myself, and then I will call on people because I have the list of participants, so we can kind of keep an order going. I'll call on folks and we'll go from there. So again, I'm Jana Schroeder. I am in Richmond, Indiana, in the United States, in the Midwest of the country. I am totally blind, and I have been blind all of my life. And my coding history is that I lost my job last summer. I was working in higher education, doing nothing that had to do with coding, but I've always been an avid computer user and interested in the idea of coding. And so I decided that it would be good to pick up a new skill. And through our state unemployment, there was an opportunity to participate in a 12-week boot camp here. That's a nonprofit boot camp that had never had a blind student before. So I talked to them. I decided to go for it and try it. Unfortunately, the pace was really fast. We did 8 hours a day in class, basically on Zoom, and had to do homework outside of that and such. So there are 3 parts to that boot camp. I was not able to pass beyond the first one. So I gave that up. But I'm still really interested, and the school was interested in helping me, but they didn't really know how. So that's when I reached out to the Programmer L listserv and such like that. So in terms of what I was learning some HTML, some C# and CSS, and we were supposed to start learning JavaScript. And I'm also interested in learning PHP, SQL, a couple of other things, React. So I use a Braille display, and I use JAWS primarily for my screen reading. And lastly, I decided to call this meeting because someone, a very smart person on the programming list, and I'm sorry, I don't recall who, you can identify yourself if you're here, said, hey, why don't we take this off of the email list and actually get on Zoom and talk to each other? And I think that's a great idea to get some, get together and see what we may want to do from here. So I would like to, with that, call on the first person is Anne Medlar. Is Anne here? You can unmute yourself. What about Ida? Can you unmute yourself and introduce yourself?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for putting this together. This is really exciting. My name is Ida Barini. I'm calling from New Jersey, Bayonne, New Jersey, in the United States. I am totally blind, but I was not always totally blind. And in fact, I learned to code when I was partially sighted through college. So I graduated from college May 2019 with a degree in computer science, and that's where I learned to code. Just a side note, I graduated from a liberal arts school, which I think was a really good environment for a blind person learning computer science, because it was less competitive than like an engineering school, for example. And now I work full-time at JPMorgan Chase with Timothy, who is also on this call, and he was the one who invited me to this meeting. So I'm really excited to, and in terms of assistive technology, I flick between NVDA and JAWS, and I also use a Braille display. In terms of technologies I use, since I am a full-time coder, we're using like Spring Boot, Java, Angular, SQL, and I do some pet projects right now in like Python, SQL, and React for my own purposes. And in terms of like other tools that I use things like Visual Studio Code and Eclipse to do my coding.
Great. And you want to say why you joined today?
All right, sorry. I think like a lot of you faced a lot of hurdles when it came to learning to code. As you were saying before, when it came to doing a boot camp, and it really wasn't designed for someone who is blind or visually impaired. And I definitely, that resonates with me. And I feel like there's a lot of knowledge out there for blind coders, but it's very scattered. And I would love to see some sort of centralized place where we can pool our knowledge and crowdsource so that the next generation or people who want to code have a much easier time than us. Hopefully that would be the goal for me.
Great. Thank you very much, Ida. And I'm going to just keep going down the list, but if we miss anyone, I'll come back to them before we go on. Next person on my list is Christopher Meyer. If you're able to unmute yourself.
Hi, this is Anne. You called on me earlier?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, sorry. I was an accountant. I had graduated from college, and then I was working as an accountant for a company called Burns International Security Services. They're uniform guards. And I was in a car accident and blinded. So as a result, there was a program in New York City called, it was at Baruch College. And I learned to train there to be a mainframe programmer. And my company hired me back. And I became a computer programmer for them. And I've been retired now for a while. But at the time, I got my training at Baruch. And then in the meantime, I would go for other classes that were available, like mostly at like JP Morgan Chase or different companies that were offering different kinds of programming. Then I went from the mainframe to the PC, and I did that for a while. And in the meantime, I went back to Fairleigh Dickinson in New Jersey, and I got an MBA in information technology. And then I probably left there quite a while ago. And right now I am learning Swift, and I'm just going through one of the books that are out there, Learning Swift in 100 Days. And so that's what I'm really doing now. But I'm not coding at all now, except for Swift.
Excellent. And could you, do you want to share what kind of adaptive technology you use?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I use mostly JAWS. I did have a Braille terminal, but I gave it to a guy who was a programmer in New Jersey at the time. And so I only really use JAWS. I use NVDA, but
sure.
Primarily JAWS. That's it.
Great. Thank you, Anne. Thank you. We've had some people jumping on, and I will come back to you when I get done. Christopher Meyer, are you able to unmute at this time?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I'm not sure why my mic wasn't coming through the first time, but here we are. Glad to be here and to meet a lot of you. So my name is Christopher Meyer, and I'm calling in from Indianapolis, Indiana, so not far from Richmond at all.
Yeah.
I'm visually impaired. I consider myself nearly total. I have been since birth. The question next is, if you learned to code, did you learn with your sight or with your, that's kind of a moot point in some ways, because so with my vision, I'm also pretty new to programming. I have been learning some Python and just doing a YouTube course on that, and I'm pretty new to CSS and JavaScript. I know some HTML and a little bit of CSS, but I'm really learning a lot of this as I go. I work as a digital accessibility analyst for Indiana University. I'm not here in that role. I'm just here as just a person who's interested to learn about programming. My background in programming is such that I've been around it for a long while. I was doing informatics research all through my college degree, but I didn't get a technical degree at all. I got a management degree. So I just have a weird background, and I'm trying to figure out how to get further into coding, how to pick up JavaScript and Python, and then move on into understanding and using frameworks. So I came to this meeting just to learn and to continue to be a fly on the wall a little bit, but hopefully to move into what can I contribute as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Christopher.
Yep.
Next is Dave Ryan.
Hi, my name is Dave Ryan. I'm from Dublin in Ireland. I'm completely blind. I have been kind of messing about with computers for quite a few years, and we originally started with Pascal. And then I was working as a software tester for 10 years and did a lot of kind of SQL stuff and ASP, the old style ASP, web stuff. I'm studying, suddenly, sorry, at the moment I'm looking at C# just through Udemy course and that and trying to get it upskilled again. I lost my job when I lost my site about 4 years ago. I mainly use JAWS. I think that's about it.
Yep. Very good. Thank you so much, Dave. And for folks who've jumped on the call, since I did this, we are, maybe it's a little obvious, but we're going around and doing introductions. I'm calling on people on the list, and when I call on you, feel free to correct me if I mispronounce your name, and just tell us a little bit about yourself as you've been hearing other people do. So next on my list is David Jones. Are you able
Hey,
to?
guys. So sorry about that. Great. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yes, my name's David. I'm from South Africa. I've been programming for about 20 years now. Lost my sight about 10, 12 years back. Started off in COBOL, SQL, Visual Basic, back then 4, 5, and 6, and then moved into SAP and been programming there for a while. And now looking back to go into some of the web development, Python, front, back end type of stuff. Yeah, but primarily staying within SAP development.
Mm-hmm. And do you use adaptive technology?
Yes, primarily JAWS, pretty much just because SAP's got scripts for JAWS and not for NVDA. So that's my main reason. Work mainly in the SAP GUI, so use a little bit of NVDA, looking into Visual Studio Code, and trying to pick up NVDA on the side.
Excellent. Thank you, David. Next
Thank you.
Thanks. Next is Diogo Melo.
Almost there, Diogo Melo, yes. I'm from Portugal. I am almost fully blind. The little I see is not enough to see the computer. And I was this way since I began to code. My background is actually in economics. I did like a boot camp in the university to learn to program and to change to the IT sector. I've been working for 3.5 years in critical software here in Portugal. I'm actually changing jobs next month. I am a Java backend software engineer for now. I know some SQL, Spring Boot, that stuff, also some Python. Last year I started with iOS development with Swift and Swift UI. The tools I use are mostly Eclipse in my job and Xcode to program to iOS. And regarding screen readers, I use VoiceOver every time. I'm a Mac guy. Okay. Why did I come to the meeting? Because I think I have lots to learn with you, and maybe I have something to help. And I think that's it.
Excellent. Thank you. Next is Galen Kapperman.
Alert, audio now unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, my name is Galen Kapperman. I'm a professor at Northern Illinois University, where I've been there for many, many years. I'm the oldest one in this conference.
Alert,
I'm absolutely certain I could be some of you people's grandfather. I learned to program in an ancient language called Fortran. Many of you have never heard of that. it wasn't that difficult. The only big problem was learning to use the mallet and chisels in those damn stone tablets. But anyway, I'm interested in learning about what I do is develop programs, training programs to help blind and visually impaired individuals. I'm totally blind myself. I use JAWS, and so I'm just sitting in to hear what people have to say and potential projects that I might be able to develop based upon people's what you people say. And if anybody has any good ideas they would like to try out, let me repeat my email address twice. My name is Galen Kapperman, and that's GalenKapperman. You can find me on the internet too, and I'm the only Galen Kapperman on the planet with a name like that. And you can reach me at gkapperman@niu.edu. That's GKAPPERMAN@niu.edu. Northern Illinois University is located in DeKalb, Illinois, and we are one of the westerly-most suburbs of Chicago. So I'm extremely pleased to be here, and you people have some really interesting things to say. So there we go. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Galen. And just for everybody else, I am going to ask people to put email addresses in chat toward the end of things, and I will collect those. And if you are willing, we can share that list. You know, you can just indicate if you're not comfortable with having your address, your email shared with other people on this call. But otherwise, we will, we will make sure that people have a way to get in touch with each other. Next on the list is Jad.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for putting this together. It's really awesome that we're doing this. I think the blind community really needs, a collective that has the ability to put together resources and work together, not only for ourselves, but, for the people that come after. So my background, well, first of all, I'm totally blind. I've been totally blind for about 24 years now. I've been coding for about 15. I started out learning C++ in university. And I'm also in Nashville, Tennessee, in the US. And so I learned C++, and I've moved on to Perl, Python, Java, a bunch of different languages. I'm mostly a backend developer. I do some front-end work, but mostly backend stuff, and I do the full range, databases, integrations, the whole works.
Do you have adaptive?
Yeah, I use JAWS, sometimes in VDA, but I guess as everyone pretty much knows, some things are accessible with one app and one are, and some other things with the other. So that's kind of where I'm at. I haven't ever really used a Braille adapter, but yeah, mostly voice.
Great, thank you, Jad. Next is JC Provost.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Hi. So I'm JC Provost. I live in Quebec, Canada, a couple of miles outside of the Montreal Island. I have been, I have been blind all my life, total. And my adaptive equipment is mostly JAWS, but as you guys know and just mentioned, it depends, right? Sometimes one will let you down and then you crank out your NVDA, and then I've even seen instances where NVDA and JAWS would let me down and narrator would save me. But anyway, so I'll use whatever floats the context and the circumstances. I also use voiceover and talkback. I've worked for and still am working for, I worked for two large corporations, Bell Canada being Canada's biggest telco, and now CGI, which is a rather big outsourcing company in the States. You would recognize them or us from American Management System, AMS. So they do contract for defense and stuff. And I've been touching a lot of things through the years. So I've been programming in C and on the mainframe. I spent quite a few years on the mainframe. So I worked with SQL and databases and DB2 for those who know, and CLIS and Rex and stuff. And on the more modern stuff, Python and also Excel macro. I spent quite a few hours, I would almost say years, building a finance handling environment for myself through Excel. So, and that's that. What I'm missing is more the more modern stuff. But I used so many script languages of all sorts, VB script and Cold Fusion and whatnot, Basic at the time, and etc. And so I'm not afraid of new languages. I didn't have the opportunity yet, but I intend to. I installed Studio Code recently, but I still use Python. I'm interested in electronics and computing. That's pretty much it. I think I've answered all your question, Jana. Let me know if I have not, if I forgot something.
I think that's great. Thank you very much,
Right.
Stacy. Next is Jim Barber.
Good morning. I have been programming for a very long time. So let's see, my name is Jim Barber. I'm calling from San Francisco. I have he, him pronouns. I am identify as blind. I have a little bit of vision, and I was born blind, so I learned how to code as a blind person. I learned how to code started learning how to code in the early 80s. I started with C and some assembly language, and then moved on to Fortran and Perl and Python and a bunch of other primarily backend languages. My career has been as a Unix IT tools developer and IT architect. Let's see, my my adaptive technology is pretty much any screen reader I can think of. I also sometimes use Zoom text and other kinds of magnification stuff. The reason I am here is I've for a long time been trying to figure out different ways of teaching folks to code. About 10 years ago, Google hired me to spend a few weeks with a blind person who went through their coding camp in New York. And I spent quite a bit of time translating language or translating exercises that were meant to be done in Scratch, which is a visual programming language where you had to kind of drag and drop things to make them work. Translating a bunch of those exercises into Python so that he could write the Python as text and then get some kind of non-visual feedback that his program was working correctly. And I learned a lot by doing that about what's really missing and what's really needed in order for blind people to do more coding. So I'm very interested in this. It's actually interesting, Jenna. I had thought about doing a Holman Prize application for the same reasons. So I congratulate you on doing it. I have lots of opinions. I will happily share them here or with you privately if you would like. I think I covered all your questions. Did I miss anything?
Nope, I think you got it. Thank you, Jim. And I think you and Dave get the prize for being the first on the call as well. So next is Jonathan. Fine.
Oh, hi. I'm pleased. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, pleased to be here. My name's Jonathan Fine. I live in Milton Keynes, halfway between London and Birmingham in the United Kingdom. I'm fully sighted. My coding history is I started with C. I got involved in the tech LaTeX typesetting system, which is actually really important in my life. And I've learned Python, and I know a bit of JavaScript and a few other things. I worked for the Open University mainly as a LaTeX expert, and my background is as much as in publishing and typesetting and education as it is in coding. I don't have any adaptive software. I do have an ergonomic keyboard to protect my hands. And why am I at this meeting? I've got a long interest in accessibility, which is becoming a big issue in the tech community, and that's how I learned about this list. And I see some commonality. I'm mainly here to learn, and I've already learned a great deal just by picking up the culture and the habits of what I've been told here. So I think that's over for me. I'm going to be leaving at 7, I'm afraid. I've got a family meeting.
All right. Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks for coming. Next is Joseph Lee.
All right. Good morning, everybody. This is Joseph Lee from Los Angeles, California, a blind volunteer software engineer with NVDA Screen Reader Project. I got interested in coding as a high school student back in 2000s when I joined the Bruno users list ran by Humanware. And I, along with a really close friend of mine who is not here, I wish I could have invited him, we got interested in writing additional extensions for Keysoft. It's not the same Keysoft I use now, because the Keysoft I use now is part of the Bruno Touch Plus, which is one of my assistive technologies, because I use it mostly for writing, not really writing, but reading program documentation, and also for testing certain screen readers and Braille display functionalities. Excuse me. And then I got accepted into a UC campus, the University of California campus, studying computer science. And that's when I learned C++. I got sort of exposed to Python towards later years, but then
Inside.
Yeah. Is it? So so I got interested in at least my goal in computer science was to give back to human writing some code, but then and then I switched to a different college with a different major, and that's when I got interested in NVIDIA development. And that's when I finally got interested in Python. So these days, I help out with NVIDIA core development. Disclaimer, I'm not employed by NVIDIA Access, but I do write some core code to NVIDIA Screen Reader. That's one of my other assistive technologies I use. One of the reasons why I joined here, networking is an important part, but the other reason I joined is to bring awareness of some practices that are not typically taught in some coding classes, which are documentation, testing strategies, and a need to communicate with other developers, as I just received a bachelor's degree in human communication. So I hope to contribute some knowledge about some writing, some effective documentation, because effective programming is writing. So I am a huge believer in writing concise and useful documentation from the outset. So that's what I hope to contribute through this meeting, and hopefully a central resource once we get this going. Thanks, everybody.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Joseph. Next, I have Kenneth.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kenneth. I'm a TVI located in the San Francisco Bay Area in California. I am just here to really pick up information for my students. I have a number of high school level students that are interested in coding. Both of the ones I have in mind are fully blind. And it seems like there's just a great wealth of information that you guys are sharing on this call. So very happy to be here. I am excited, and I got my TVI credential in San Francisco and learned, I would say, beginning level knowledge about JAWS and various screen readers. And I did a recent course on voiceover. So I'm a newer TVI. I just got my credential 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half is probably more exact. So I'm still learning as I go and learning more today. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Kenneth. Next is Mitchell.
Hello.
Hi.
I believe you can hear me. Hi, so my name is Mitchell Bridwell. I am currently a sophomore at Purdue University in West Lafayette. And I'm majoring in computer science. My goal eventually is to become an accessibility consultant. So I figured that this would probably be a track that I could go down to, I guess, know what goes on behind the scenes in the sense of just coding and how accessibility is implemented. So if I could implement accessibility, but also give suggestions on implementing accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very new to coding, I would say. I've really only started picking it up last year. But I know some Java, I know some C, and I mainly use JAWS. I used to use VoiceOver, but I quickly learned that the terminal does not read everything. At least I could be wrong, but from my experience, I was missing a lot of Java errors when I was running it on the terminal in Mac OS. From my experience, I could be completely wrong unless there's something that I need to change that, and I'd love to know how. But yeah. Thank you so much for putting this on. I actually just found about this yesterday.
Great. Thanks, Mitchell. Nick Adamson.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Nick Adamson. I'm from the UK. I have no useful vision, just a bit of light detection. That's about it. And that's since I was born. So I've always been had a visual impairment while I've been learning to code. I graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Software Engineering back in 2004. And since then, so for the last 17 years, I've been a commercial software developer. Mostly on Windows, but also a fair bit of embedded C++, but also a whole range of software development. So right from requirements analysis, UML and software design to implementation, which is where my love is at, right through to software testing and then documentation. So the whole gambit of what is more than just being a coder, which is more that which is more of the software engineer aspects of it. I work for a major defense company, and for the last 8 years, I've written software which goes on tanks, which is quite exciting and quite has a cool factor to it. In terms of access tech, I use a braille display, and I have to say I struggle to code without it. I very much love my braille display. And I've used a number of different screen readers, and I'm currently learning JAWS, which seems a bit of an odd one. Most people seem to go the other way, but I've only just started learning JAWS, but I've been using Supernova and NVDA and TalkBack and VoiceOver and all sorts of stuff. Why am I here? I'm here because I think that there needs to be a common place where we can get information, where we can share knowledge, or we can at least find someone who knows that information. And like I say, I think there's more to being a computer programmer than just writing code, although obviously that is the fundamental part of it. There's much more to it, and I think there's a lot of aspects of it that aren't covered in sort of what is currently out there. So I'm hoping to both learn and also help advise. 17 years has been a fairly long time of doing some of this stuff. So.
Yep. Thank you, Nick. Next is Pablo Morales.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi, my name is Pablo Morales. I am originally from Venezuela, South America. But right now I am in North Carolina, near to Winston-Salem. It's a place called Rural Hall. I learned to I learned programming when I was around 8 years old with what I have available in Venezuela for those days, that it was a very old computer, a Commodore 64, that it was already old for those days. And I learned with Visual, with Basic, the regular old Basic version that I don't know if people here remember it, that it used numbers on the line, in the code lines. I learned, it was my first step when I was a kid. Then later, when I was around 18 years old, I started to try with C, C++. Then I went to school. I went to the electronic engineering school, and then I got transferred to the computer science school. I received my degree in 1997. So let down, I lost my sight suddenly while I was working in what in Venezuela is equivalent to the Attorney General office, but in Venezuela. I was working as a software developer, a computer specialist there. Suddenly I lost my sight, so I had the opportunity to come to America, to United States. So here, not knowing English, I started to work in a nonprofit organization in the area of manufacturing. And I stayed there for a very long time until I was financially able to pay for school. However, I did not come back to work in the area of computers, since I already have a degree, but for me it was very difficult to find a job due to the lack of recent experience. So I was teaching myself, so I gained some experience in C#, in JavaScript and Java. I have been also working in Python, not too much, but I have been working on that. A few weeks ago, a very nice guy from the LAS team, he shared with me a very accessible resource called Visual Studio Code. It's a very, very nice software that we are able to develop in different kind of languages on this platform. It's very, very accessible. Pretty light. It doesn't use a lot of resources as a Visual Studio. It uses a lot of resources. So, well, I finished school. I have a bachelor's now in in business administration, and I am now taking my MBA in business analytics. The purpose that I have in being here today is to improve to improve the link between technology and businesses, since I can see that now studying the area of business analytics, I can understand that it's a lot of problems in business that are able to be solved in a structural and logic way. So in the same way how we develop algorithms to solve problems. So I am sure that technology is a very good tool that we will be able to use more and more and more in businesses. Yeah, well, basically I use JAWS and VDA. That's all.
Thank you, Pablo. Paulius.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay.
Yep.
I'm Paulius from Lithuania, from Vilnius, and I'm completely blind. My journey in programming started maybe about 7 years ago, I guess, when I was in school at 9th class, and then I started doing first things in programming using Pascal programming language. I taught very basics in this language, and soon moved on more advanced technologies such as HTML5 and PHP. And I have done some experiments using Win32 API in C language. I also have played a bit around with NVDA source code. And now I'm a second year computer science student at Vilnius Tech University. And here I learn some in some more deeper programming concepts, such as C++. And I'm also know basics in Python language, and just a few months ago started learning something about Laravel, PHP Laravel framework. So I'm using NVDA as my primary screen reader all the time. And maybe I'm seeking to get the web developer job in the near future. And I joined this meeting maybe for listening about how other blind programmers live around the world and what are their experience.
Thank you. Next is Sang-Yoon. Hi.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, now can.
Okay, yeah. Nice to meet you all. And my name is Sang-Yoon Han. I'm originally from South Korea and currently living in Kirkland, Washington, near Seattle. And I'm totally blind, and I lost my sight when I was six. And I started learning computer programming when I was in college, and the first language was C. And after that, I got to learn quite a lot of languages. The other day I counted them, and it was more than 20.
Wow.
So I don't want to name them all. And so I studied computer science and engineering, and currently working as machine learning software engineer. And mostly these days I'm using Python. And the access technology, I'm familiar with most of the Windows screen readers, JAWS, Window Eyes, NVDA. Even I had a chance to try the Supernova or Hell, those stuff. And also, but these days I'm mostly using Mac, so VoiceOver. And I'm a heavy Braille user. So for programming, I think, I don't think I can do programming without Braille. And what else? The reason today I'm joining is I've learned quite a lot of things about programming so far. So probably there are some things I can share. And also, but the more important reason is I would like to hear from others, what are the difficulties these days people are facing, and see if there is anything I can help.
Very good. Thank you. Stefan.
Yes. Hello.
Yes.
My name is Stefan Weisse. I'm from Romania, Europe. I was passionate. I had a passion for computers from school, but I professionally code since 2013 when I graduated. I code mainly in C#, Java, and some Python using Visual Studio and Android Studio. I'm blind from birth, so I had to learn programming that way. I'm a former JAWS user. Now I use NVDA. And the reason I'm here is because I think coding is a career not fully exploited by the blind. I think more blind people should do this. Locally, along with some friends, I've started a course for young blind people to get into this. And I'd like to see what others have to say about this, and also maybe contribute.
Thank you, Stefan. Next is Timothy.
Hi, my name is Timothy Breitenfeldt. I am nearly completely blind, and I am calling in from Yakima, Washington. It's the northwest of the United States. I guess learned to code. I got my bachelor's degree in at Eastern Washington University. It's a little town called Cheney, Washington, right next to Spokane, Washington. And I primarily use in my day-to-day job working at JP Morgan Chase, Visual Studio Code, Eclipse. Also been wrestling with working with Oracle DB, and personally, on my personal projects, I also use Python, sometimes PHP. Yeah, and I mainly use JAWS and NVDA primarily for adaptive technologies. And I joined this meeting because it was actually a conversation I've had with a lot of my friends long before this came up on the programming list. And it was even a conversation that I believe I helped instigate on another mailing list, National Federation for the Blind Computer Science mailing list. And the conversation ended up kind of falling flat for various political reasons, because of NFB and stuff. So I'm very, very excited that someone else brought this up. My intention was to kind of bring it up to the list eventually. So once I got settled into my job, so I'm super excited about that. And one of the big things I want to bring to the table is trying to think a little bit bigger, even beyond the programming world, which all of us are obviously very familiar with, and recognizing that we're not alone in that, we want a central resource for information. A lot of us has gotten bachelor's degrees, and I'm sure I had to take math classes, and learning math is not an easy thing as a blind person, and having a central resource for that as well. Those in sciences, etc. And I have several friends who are all over that, and they're like, yeah, it would be absolutely fabulous to actually have a central resource like that. So kind of thinking even a bit beyond just a resource for programmers. But yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Timothy. I have a phone number that starts with 860. I don't know if that's someone who's also on the Zoom call, but just using that for audio, or if it's someone who hasn't yet introduced themselves. If your phone is 860, I believe, how do you?
Hi.
There you go. Hi.
Hi, my name is Eric Brinkman. I'm living in White Plains, New York, just a little bit north of New York City. My phone number is from Connecticut, though, because that's where I grew up. I was born blind because of Leber's congenital amaurosis. I developed an interest in technology around the age of 8 or 9 when I used Keysoft and then JAWS, and realized that with JAWS I could accomplish a lot on my own that I otherwise would need sight assistance for. I got a bachelor's degree in computer science with a minor in information systems, and currently working as a developer at an insurance company, New York Life Insurance Company. I've actually done a lot of mainframe programming there, mainly in COBOL and PL1. And I knew what Fortran was when, I forget the name of the person who mentioned it earlier. I've never really used it, but I know what it was because it was used in the same time as COBOL. But I've done obviously Java, C++. I did that in college. I've dabbled with C#. I've done some Visual Basic, macros, and Excel. I joined for I have a little bit of vision. I can see the lights coming out of windows. I can kind of see people's faces on the TV screen, but I cannot see well enough to read, print, order, to drive. And I've been this way since birth. I learned coding this way. I use JAWS in conjunction with a Braille display, the Braille Edge 40-cell display. I also have started dabbling with NVDA recently, actually out of recommendation from another person on the list. And I also use VoiceOver on the Mac. I don't use that much these days. I mostly use Windows on my Mac because I find that there's too many accessibility issues now with the Mac for what I want to do with it. But I joined this call for similar reasons that many have said. I think there's knowledge amongst the blindness community of coding is very scattered, and I hope to both learn from others and maybe help teach others where I can.
Thank you, Eric. Ted Shelley?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. My name is Ted Shelley. I'm currently living in Clearwater, Florida. I have retinitis pigmentosa, which most of you will know is a progressive condition. I started learning programming more than 50 years ago, so I think I can compete with Galen to being the oldest person on this call. Back in those days, though, I was programming on a mainframe with punch cards, and the punch cards, even at that time for me, were difficult to read. And I thought, how am I ever going to do this if my vision deteriorates? So I got a degree in something else, but 10 years later, we started getting terminals with nice, bright, glowing letters. So I went back to school and learned to program really well, worked programming mainframes for many years. Then I moved over into analytics and data science, which I have been doing now for some years. I'm currently employed at American Express. The languages, I don't think I'm up to 20 yet, but pretty close, from Fortran to COBOL, mainframe assembler, various other things. Now I mostly use SAS, SQL, Python, and some R. The adaptive software has been a continual change from one thing to another, starting with handheld lenses, then to on-screen magnifiers, zoom text, JAWS a few years ago. Now I use a combination of JAWS and the built-in Windows magnifier, so they still have some usable vision. I use a editor that has been around for as long as I've been programming, and I've stuck with it for all that time. It's called KEdit, which is a Windows rewrite of a mainframe editor called Xedit. It's a wonderful, wonderful editor. Why am I at this meeting? Well, I think that having a resource that we can point people to that will give them an opportunity to understand how you can program as a blind person would be really excellent. I'd love to be able to do that, because I think that a programming career is a great opportunity for those that are blind or visually impaired. I'd like to be able to point others to that kind of a resource.
Thanks, Ted. Adil Sheikh. Hi. Are you there, Adil?
I'm here. Can you listen to me?
Yes, now I can.
So, I'm from India and I'm about to graduate in computer application. So it's been, I think, 2 years I have been programming. I mostly program in Python and Dart. I'm currently programming in Flutter, and that's my favorite one. And just like everyone here,
We're having trouble understanding you. I don't know if you can hold your microphone a little differently and try. I realize we may be dealing with something that can't be addressed fully, but.
Now, are you able to? Can you listen me now?
Yes, a little better.
Okay. So, I'm from India and I'm about to graduate in computer application. So, I mostly program in Python and as well as in Dart. I use Flutter for Android app development. And just like everyone, I use VS Code for programming. And I think that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us. Brian Duarte.
My name is Brian Duarte. I have a degree in a bachelor's in science in software engineering, primarily focused in embedded systems. And then I went on to get my master's and my PhD in computer science. I recently graduated in December with my PhD. So I now work for the U.S. government, Department of Defense. I relocated from Arizona, where I was born and raised, to now I'm over in the DC metro area doing work. I'm actually here just to kind of support somebody that I used to mentor back in the day, and she's a rock star now, and she told me about this, and it's really cool and encouraging to hear some people I know and other people I don't know, but just the collective group and all kind of together for one common good. So I'm happy to be here.
Are you willing to share? Are you blind or sighted or? Try again. I think you're unmuted, but I can't hear your voice. Okay, that's fine. If you're not able to share that right now, I'm not sure what's going on. I think that is everyone that I see on the list has introduced themselves, but if anybody has not, please unmute yourself and speak up now, introduce yourself. I think we got everybody. So this has been really rich. Obviously, it took quite a bit of time to get through everybody on this call, but I think it was really worthwhile to see all the different, and it's really cool to see all the different backgrounds that people are coming from, being students, being professionals, being teaching themselves, being teachers or professors. So we have quite a range here, and I think it's very exciting. I do want to move along in our agenda. The second thing that I was hoping we could do, and we'll maybe right now it's already 5 past the hour, so we were planning to close at 1/2 past. I wonder if people could stay on for either 15 minutes or half an hour longer. Could you let's see, how can we do this? I think you can do the raise hand if you could stay on for an extra half hour. I'll try to see how many people are raising their hands if you are able to do that. I mean,
This is Eric. I joined via phone. I'm willing to stay on an extra half hour.
Great.
I know I'm the 860 number.
Yep, thank you.
This is Joseph, and I can. And I think you can also look at the text chats too.
Oh yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Okay, I am able to.
Okay. Well, let's just say we're going to do that. Obviously, if I see 5, 6 people have raised their hands, 7. So I think that this is reasonable. If you have to leave, obviously, please do leave. And I will say at this point, if you haven't already done so, if you're able to, please put your email address in the chat so that I can get those and create a list. And for Eric, you can either email me or the list and let us know. I think you said you're on the Program L mailing list, so we should be able to pick you up.
Yes, I am. I will keep an eye out and I will email them.
Great, thanks.
Pardon me,
yes.
This is Kinet. Can more be said about how to join the mailing list or the listserv? I want to share it with my students, but I don't know how to.
The Program L, is there someone here who can speak for that?
This is Josephly speaking, and at Connect, I think the mailing list is program-L. I believe we had a discussion about moving that list from one provider to another, but that's for another time. Right now, program-L, I think that's the mailing list that we're talking about, is hosted on free lists. And it's been a while since I looked at the subscription procedure for that. So
you go to freelists.org, and then there is a list. There's a link to browse the various lists. I'm pretty sure there's a search function, so that if you just search for program, you'll find program-L at freelist.org as one of the options.
Right. Or you can do Google search and just type freelist.org plus program-L, all in, if you want to search that way.
Great. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thanks very much, Cadet, for raising that. And there are other lists out there, but this is the one where I got started. And so I think a majority or most people on here are from that list or connected in some way, but there are others. And we can, again, try to start collecting some resources and sharing those with others if they like. So what I'd like to do now is try to kind of limit each thing to, say, a 15-minute interval, knowing that we can always come back and do more later. I'd like to kind of have a brainstorm among us on what are your needs or what were your needs as a blind person, learning to code or coding for that matter, and just try to make a brainstorm of that. And the reason I'm asking us to start there is because I want to consider a user kind of design framework where instead of just like saying we should create this, that, or the other thing, we start by saying, well, what is it that people need? And then as we start looking at possible ways to address this, whether it's, a website, a course, whatever, then we can try to match that up with the needs. Is that going to meet the needs that people have stated that they have? And obviously there, not every viewpoint or need is going to be represented in this group, and we won't have time today to speak all of them, but it would be great to get a list started like that. So what I'd like to propose that we do is that people just take turns. And if that becomes too confusing and too many people trying to speak at once, I will ask people to go back to raising hands, but I think that it's fine. And I see 3 people have raised their hands. If you were doing that for the poll earlier, you can go ahead and put it down so that I won't call on you, but also, yeah, so I'm going to try doing this without doing raised hands, but if we need to, we can interrupt that. And just be aware and try to be very brief in your statements and let others speak before you chip in again. Like I said, we'll have other opportunities to share some of this. So the question again is, what are your needs or what were your needs either in learning to code or in coding as a professional? As a blind person specifically.
Brian?
Yes, go for it.
I can speak to when I was learning programming, but also I mentor a lot of students who are blind or low vision who are currently learning to program. And I can tell you that a lot of our needs are the same, but there's some differences. When I was learning to program, one of the biggest issues I had was tools weren't accessible. All my peers were using Sublime Text. A lot of them are still using Sublime Text because it's a lightweight editor with a lot of functionality. and it's completely inaccessible, or at least it was back then. There was one editor that was pretty accessible back then, and that was Eclipse, but it was very heavy, and at the time it really only supported Java. So when I was doing C++ or C or any other language, I had a really hard time, and I didn't have any of the help there. And then that also came into compiling code or executing code, things like that. So those were kind of my issues, but some of the things that were the same between what I'm seeing now with my students and me were how to understand data structures. There's so many visual diagrams and visual elements, visual descriptions that describe what a single linked list is, or how a binary search tree functions, or what it looks like, these graphs, these depth first searches or breadth first searches. And there was just no real way to understand those from a blind perspective. And they're still having the same issues now. So those are the things I wanted to point out.
Great. Thank you, Brian.
This is Jim.
I'm sorry, who was besides Jim? I think they started talking first.
Eric?
Eric, go for it.
I think what our needs are is either a course or a book or something, preferably that's interactive, that can teach but in an accessible fashion. I went through, when I got my job, they sent us to summer training, basically, which is similar to what a person on here described as boot camp, in that it was a 12-week class, but it was way too fast. It was all examples on the board. It was I didn't have a hope of keeping up with it. So as a result, they brought in an instructor to train me one-on-one, which I'm still very grateful for, because I was afraid I wasn't going to get the job because I couldn't follow the class. But that just resulted in me kind of being in another world from everyone else and isolated. And there's no standard medium for blind people to learn it. Like a company can't just send you to blind programming training. So I don't know that there ever will be, but in my mind, that's something that's needed, just because otherwise it's ridiculous to try and go to any program like that where you're expected to keep pace with a not 8-hour-a-day program.
Yep. Great. Thank you, Eric. And Jim?
JC?
I think Jim is next.
So I think that there's a lot to be kind of separated out here. I could offer, and I think Brian could, and other people could offer, an introduction to Java, an introduction to JavaScript, or other kinds of classes that are really aimed at blind people. But I think we'd find that a lot of blind people aren't ready, and a lot of people who think they're ready to take the class really aren't. The first thing I found when I was working with blind people trying to code was they didn't really understand the computer. They didn't understand the screen reader. They didn't really understand how the operating system worked. They didn't really have a good grasp of the computer. So they had a really hard time moving text from one program to another. They had a really hard time, figuring out how to write stuff up and how to run. They just had a really hard time with computer basics, which I feel like is outside the realm of teaching someone to program. So I think the first thing is people really need to have a good grasp of how their AT works, how the computer works, and so on. The second thing I think that is really important is a good sense of how to do problem solving. So the idea that you're going to spend quite a bit of your time kind of thinking about the problem and then how, as a blind person, to solve it, which a lot of people aren't used to doing, which I have to say, I don't quite understand, because it's how I, as a blind person, survive. But I was working with lots of other blind people who just didn't really think about, okay, so a sighted person would do it this way. So what are some ways in which you could do it? And they had a really hard time kind of brainstorming around that. And so I just think some time spent pushing yourself to do a bit more problem solving is probably a good idea. And then the final thing I want to say about this is that you're going to need a reader. You're going to need a sighted person from time to time who can talk you through some of the diagrams that Brian was talking about with regards to data structures, who can talk you through how a new piece of software works, et cetera. And I know I said that was the last thing, but one final thing, I don't think an IDE is really what's missing. VS Code and various editors plus command line tools can already do what's needed. It's just, like I said in the beginning, a matter of learning the computer and learning really how it works. So I think I said a lot, but thanks for listening.
Great, thank you. I believe JC is next.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Uh-huh.
Okay. I guess I'm coming at this from a different perspective, a bit anyways, although all the points that were mentioned were quite valid. Because I'm a hands-on kind of guy, what I really always need and always find it very useful when I can get my hands on is code example. A good commented program that says, this is a JavaScript program. Here's what I'm going to do with this program. And that, as I say, that is well commented. And that to me is much more useful, but that's just me. I know others learn through different means and would rather have, somebody teaching and whatever. But because I'm the hands-on kind of guy, code examples to me are of the essence. And I'm sure they could be obviously useful to everybody, perhaps after they take a course, which is fine. But at one point in their progression towards being a better programmer, I think code examples would be very important.
Sure, thank you.
Timothy? Oh.
I'm sorry, say again, names?
Timothy? Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Excuse me. This is Hamid. I'm working Java for 3 years. When I was learning Java, I thought that everything is pretty cool, and I have Eclipse, and I can use databases. But when I got a job, I found out that my colleagues are using some tools that I cannot use them. I think as a blind developer, we need a accessibility community that forces big companies that their products used frequently by all developers to make their software accessible, and maybe this group can consult them that how can they make their software accessible, and also it can provide accessibility feedbacks on GitHub and other softwares. Excuse me, I'm not a native speaker, and I'm not very fluent.
No, that's fine. It comes through great. Thank you.
Thank you too.
Next.
Timothy?
Yeah, go for it, Timothy.
So I just wanted to, I guess, say it's like, to me, I kind of look at it from the perspective of, the big problem that as blind individuals that we have is, well, GUIs, right? Graphical user interfaces. Whether we're talking libraries or we're talking about the actual interface that we use with our screen readers. And understanding it's like, how that, the tools that work with JAWS, if you, as a blind person, as we join a university and, we go to college, we decide to get a bachelor's degree in computer science, it's like, every one of us is probably like, unless you have, someone that who's kind of already done this, it's like, well, your whole class is using, I don't know, JGrasp, and it's just like, is that accessible? I have no idea. And it's like you have to figure it out, and it's like, knowing which of these is accessible, and then the other thing is that technology evolves so fast that things become accessible or not accessible incredibly quickly.
So to me, creating something like a book does kind of worry me, just because of how fast technology progresses. And I'm afraid that something like a book is going to end up getting out of date very quickly unless maintained. And it, something like a website that can, the community, it's community driven, where we can have forums, we can have articles that are updated, and the community can kind of help push forward to, to help maintain, a lot of these things that are just, becoming accessible and not accessible, learning how IntelliJ is set up. That's something I just learned recently, enabling the Java access bridge, using the NVA add-on, and all these other things that are involved with that. So, yeah.
Great, thanks.
Nick.
Okay, great. Hold on a second, Nick. I'd like to hear who else is really passionate about talking on the subject. We do need to move on pretty soon to another one, and you will have other chances. But if you're really passionate about saying something that hasn't been said yet, please say your name so I get a sense of who and how many of you there are.
I would like to add one thing before we move. I'm sorry.
Okay, we're not moving yet. Just who is this?
This is Pablo Morales.
Okay, I'm just taking names right now.
Ida?
Yes.
Pablo and
Ida?
Mitchell. And no, hold on. Ida and
Nick.
Nick.
And Jim? Chad. Okay.
Chad.
You guys are going to be the last ones on this topic, and then I'm going to move us.
Okay,
Nick,
let us start by the ladies. Ida.
Nick is next.
Oh, Nick? Okay. Okay, who wants you first? Who you want first?
Nick.
Nick, okay.
Okay, so a couple of things. Yeah, I want to massively agree with what Tim said. What I think we need is an almost a living resource in terms of it can host courses if that's what we want to do, but it also something that is searchable. So one of the things that I find is that there are so many programming tools, and quite often we don't get a choice of what programming tools we'll use. We have to use what our companies use or what our teams are using. And it would be really good to have some sort of resource that you can look up the name of common development tools and environments and go, okay, is anyone using that from an accessibility point of view? Is it accessible? What are the hints and tips? Almost like like Apple This has for the Apple App Store, something like that, but very specifically aimed at programming tools. What I don't think we need to do is make Stack Exchange, the programmers forum.
Right.
I don't think we necessarily need to do that, but I think something like that as a resource would be amazing.
Great. I'm going to call on Mitchell next.
All right. Yeah, I'm going to keep this brief. So my main needs that I've been learning about for coding is the problem solving is definitely a thing that I need to work on, but it's also, I think, especially in when you're going through college and university classes, when you don't have when people are teaching so visually that when they go to office hours or just in general, problem solving with other people who teach in the same way, more visually, it's more difficult to problem solve without knowing everything that they know. And I think the difficulty comes in the just the gap between visual and non-visual that seems to exist in a lot of university teaching methods in general, with that specific things in mind. I feel like that's the hard thing, and just being able to compensate for that as best as people can. I think that's something that I would say is a good would be a nice start to have, if that makes sense.
Yep.
This is Jim.
I'm sorry, I'm going to call on Ida next.
Hi, so just briefly, some things that I've struggled with or that I have always thought of would be great. One thing is always getting context in code, especially when we're reading line by line. And so I've always dreamt about a multi-line Braille display or something. I know that's just a pipe dream, but that's my dream. So something else that I've always struggled with is quickly finding errors in output. So especially using like a large framework like Spring that spits out a bunch of things, something might be color coded in a specific way. So I've always struggled with going through a large amount of output, or like maybe a cloud output that's a huge amount of data, and finding, just like a sighted person would, what I quickly need. And again, these might be things that people have solved, but these are personally, as someone who's coded, these are my issues. Using collaboration tools like GitHub or Bitbucket really effectively, like in a very large repository, being able to review pull requests efficiently and quickly. And the keywords here are quickly and efficiently. There might be workarounds or things that I do, but they're not as quick or efficient as my cited peers, for example. Another thing is pair programming. So unless I'm the driver where I'm sharing my screen and I have my hands on the keyboard and someone is directing me, pair programming doesn't work for me because I cannot read what somebody else is doing on their end through a screen share or something like that. So those are my, and one last thing is learning more advanced techniques when it comes to adaptive technology. Oftentimes when you Google adaptive technology or like a JAWS tutorial or something like that, it's very basic stuff. And once you move beyond that, especially if you're in the technology space, there are more advanced functionalities that you can take advantage of, but I feel like it's harder to find out that information for some reason. I feel like a lot of times the docs stop at the beginner level.
Great.
That's it for me.
Thank you, Ida. Pablo?
Okay, I was muted. I'm sorry. One thing that I have been difficult at the beginning for every time that I try to start to learn something new is it has been difficult for me to find support because there is the expectation that I am a advanced software developer when I am not. And sometimes the feedback is not good enough. So I think that is part of the same problem that Ida is mentioning, that it's a gap between nothing and a lot, that it should be filled in a certain way. Sometimes we have questions that are not for basic learners as well. They are not for advanced people. So they are in the middle. It's difficult to find resources or enough information about that. And I have found in MLS that the support is not what I expect sometimes regarding the kind of communication that I receive. And it's very, very demotivating that sometimes very, very, it's bad. I mean, it put people down since it's not what you are expecting to receive from other blind folks that have been in the same situation before. The other last thing is going to match with what Ida was mentioning about the trainings. It's a huge gap. And the JOS trainings and the MBDA trainings that we found online on the web, they are so basic. So when we are trying to learn more about certain tools, it's not too much information. It's not too much support from around. As the when we start to be a little bit wishing for more detailed training. It's not training about that.
Yep. Thank you, Pablo. Jad.
Okay, I was just going to say real quickly that I agree with Tim. I mean, yeah, Tim and Jim as well, and then Ida as well. So I think one of the biggest things that we have here is a lot of people trying to get into coding or any type of tech in general without a lot of underlying knowledge or skill sets. So being able to get people up to speed with basic tech skills is going to be a good foundation when they're trying to learn coding and different development information. Also, I think we're kind of I think we need to restructure some of the questions that we're asking. It's really good to know, what do people need in general, but I think it's such a hard question to answer because we have so many different skill levels. We have so many different targets that people are trying to reach. So I think stepping back a little bit and figuring out, are we talking about, what do we need to, what resources need to be available? Asking that question in a more clear or more specific sense would be good because, what resources do we need to learn how to program, how to debug, how to do all those different things. So that's kind of what I had to add.
Yeah, thanks. And that's a really great place to
JC.
I'm sorry, Jason.
And Jim.
And Jim, you have already spoken. If you don't mind, I do really need to move the group on, and you can both speak in the next section and say either what you want to say or an answer to the question I'm going to pose next. But I did want to say that Jad's, sure, I understand that we need to get very specific. This is just meant to be a big picture brainstorm to see what needs are out there. So what I wanted to move to next, like I said, were what are some ideas that people have for solutions? And some people have already started throwing some of those out. But if you have other ideas for solutions, I'm going to open it up to that. And the more specific question around that is, if we had $25,000 from the Holman Prize in a year, what would you do with that? Because I'm trying to figure out something that would be useful to a lot of people, not just what I think would be useful. So I hope that makes sense. And I am gonna, why don't we start with Jim and JC, and then others who want to speak, we'll open it up.
If I think, so the things I kind of wanted to point out were that there's a real cry for better training, better resources, and better, a place where you can go to find out if a particular tool is accessible or whatever. The problem is that there's no real, that would be a community, those would all be community driven things. Thank you.
Mr. Barbour?
Yeah.
This package was delivered to me by mistake.
Oh, thank you.
And I inadvertently opened it.
That's fine.
And it's jerky.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that, guys.
No problem.
So those would all be community-driven efforts. And so the question is, how can we kind of help the community to do this? And so I think if I had the Holman Prize, I would probably spend a lot of time trying to pay someone to write the documentation that is missing, right? How to do advanced level JAWS stuff, how to do, I forget what else came up, right? But basically writing the documentation that's missing, I think is really the place that I would want to put my effort. I think trying to, for example, set up tutoring or an IDE or a website or the kinds of things like that, those are hard to sustain. But if you can put together a bunch of documentation and put it somewhere for people to read, and you can pay someone to do it well, that's where I feel like the money could be best used.
Great, thank you. JC?
I think, and people have started to mention that, we need to be very careful how, I'll say, for lack of a better term, how thin we can spread. And we don't want that, because otherwise I think we're going to fail. And the comments that triggered what I just said was stuff like, where teachers sometimes are too visual, and Lord knows I was a victim of that. It's been a long time, but looks like habits are hard to break. So it is indeed a problem, except that, is it a problem this group can tackle? I don't think so, unless we go on a political whatever and try and sensitize people. That's definitely not what I had in mind. I don't know about the other participants, but I'm just saying, and it's the same, when we say, search for things. Well, Google is very good at searching. The only thing is it's going to give us too much. So I'm almost thinking that if I had 25 grants to spend, I think I would try and build a panel, and I would pay those folks. And we'd have to find qualified people, obviously, people with different backgrounds, just like this bunch here around this table, which seems very interesting to me. And I would try and build a panel of folks, guys and girls, who are able to evaluate, okay, I'm not just going to search Java course, because Google is going to give you 50 gazillion results. But this panel could research that and say, okay, if you're blind, here are, say, I don't know, 3 courses. Is it W3 schools, whatever? Is it something else that you will not have a tough time going through? From an accessibility perspective. So that's what I would do with 25 grants.
Brian?
Brian, next.
Yeah, I think that the problem is very much solvable for what we're needing, because we've all been there, we've all done it, we all have unique experiences, different languages, different editors, different computer systems, different screen readers, different technology. We need a place to put this information, and it needs to just be done like Jim said. It just needs to be strategic. It needs to be done in such a way. It could be as simple as a wiki. It just needs to be done to where it's just not everybody regurgitating everything. As you can see, we can be long-winded. We need it to be concise and useful. And if you just give people open access, it's going to become messy very quickly. But we have the knowledge. We just need to have a place to share it. I've been teaching at Arizona State University to hundreds of sighted engineers. I taught them as a blind professor. I taught them blind techniques. I taught them accessibility. It's easily doable. It just needs to take the time. And I think we can do it, and it can be done. It just needs a place to have it posted.
Thank you.
Mitchell.
Go for it, Mitchell.
All right. Yeah, no, and I completely agree with everything that has been said so far. And this is a suggestion for just if I'm just going to throw out a different suggestion, because I agree with everything else here. Sure. But so recently, and this has personally worked for me, and this might not work for people, but I know mentioning interactive activities. The biology textbook that I'm using is basically you can read and then answer questions, and having something like that, or just being able to, just depending on, it would take a while if this was ever created. And I don't feel, and this would be a very difficult thing to create, and probably I do think that a wiki would be better. However, having some sort of, like, if you code this way, and it can basically say, here's a suggestion for changing your code to make this work better. If instead of just having just errors pop up, having actual, like, legible, for like the beginner programmer, just legible stuff that they can just read and like, okay, that's what I did wrong. How do I change this? Here's some suggestions, and here's how you can work on it and problem solve. Just pushing you in the right direction without giving you the actual answer.
Yep. Thank
Chad.
you. Chad?
I would like to see us collectively start some type of mentoring program where those of us who have been in the field for longer periods or have knowledge to share, potentially offer to be mentors on a voluntary basis. So that, I think the listserv, the email list is great. The website is great. And it's definitely something we need to have as a data repository, but also just have interaction with each other on a more flexible basis. I think email is a little rigid for what we're talking about. Maybe even instant messaging would be great. So if we could set up something like that, would be very, very helpful.
Yep.
Timothy?
Timothy?
So I agree with everyone. I've heard some great ideas. I think mentoring is an excellent idea, and I think that you were kind of right. It's like, we kind of need a central place, and like well, that's a central repository that you know, we can have, you know, tons of links, and I mean, at minimum, it's, you know, like even just looking at the Program L mailing list, it's, you know, even if that was the conversations we had on there was a form, let's say similar to Stack Overflow, that would actually pop up in Google when you actually search for things, like at minimum, that would be great. You know, I believe that we could do so much more, but you know, it's like, it's that visibility that I think that we're all driving at. It's like, we want to be able to type stuff into Google and actually get results back about the things that are actually being talked about on these mailing lists, talked about, you know, in, you know, kind of behind these, you know, closed doors, I guess. I mean, every now and then I can type something into Google, and if there's no other search results, I can pull back the, like, a mailing repository for one of these mailing lists. But I'm sure everyone knows it's no fun looking through the web interface for those to begin with, let alone, you know, actually finding that. So yeah, I think that, you know, definitely having kind of this website to help drive a central repository, you know, whether that includes a form as well, and as well as articles.
Did you
and
hear the music?
No.
Oh, you couldn't?
Hey, could you mute yourself, please?
Thought you might have been enjoying it a little bit.
Hello. Could you please mute yourself? Someone who's talking about music is coming through to us. You can please mute yourself. Is there somebody who wanted to speak next?
Yeah, that was about it. So
Eric.
Okay. Yeah. Go for it. Whoever started.
Eric. This is Eric. I would, if I had the $25,000 reward, I would try to put together some sort of MOOC type platform that's either intended for blind people or intended for blind people. Because going off of what somebody said about when you search for something in Google, you get 1 billion results. Now these MOOCs like Coursera, Udemy, edX, LinkedIn Learning are all the rage, especially with the pandemic going on. But I mean, you can try a course. For instance, my company is pushing people to do data science, and somebody mentioned R. I tried the data science course from Johns Hopkins on there because that's what people in my company are going through on Coursera, but I don't find it to be very accessible because it's all graphs, and it's similar to YouTube, you know, where it's the professor is showing stuff on the screen. So I wish there were a consensus on which of those platforms is most accessible, but I doubt there is, because they're all classes taught by different professors with different teaching styles. So I'm sure that doesn't exist. But on some level, if there could be a site that we could all go to, that would even help, because a big part of those platforms is interacting with other people in the forums, and then that would even just help us interact with other blind people. I mean, we already have the list, but just finding, if you don't know the list, you know, if you don't know about this list, where are you going to go?
Yep. Thank you. There was someone else who was starting to speak up.
Dave, yeah.
Go for it.
What I was thinking was, if we had something like, you know, the Be My Eyes app for coders, where if you were having a problem with it, the code where you could shout out and you could get a response back, say an audio and textual response back from somebody who'd have the skills and have to, you know, be able to assist. I think that would be something that'd be really, really useful.
Thank you.
This is Ida. I would use part of the money at least to do a hackathon. And you could spin it any way you want. You could have, you know, corporate sponsors to do some sort of hiring initiative, or you could have it more of a mentor-mentee situation where you pair blind students with a couple more experienced people in the field to be on different teams and work on the project, blind related or not blind related, whatever, you know, hackathon project or theme you came up with. And that would give a lot of people exposure to, you know, more experienced technologists. You could even have some sort of master level or higher level skilled people going around the room or virtually going around the room, or if it was physical or whatever it was, to help troubleshoot just like in a regular hackathon, and in that impart a bunch of tips and tricks, and also reward people and students and get them excited about coding.
Thank you. Great, Ida.
Hamid.
Go for it.
A compliment that already said, I would create a central place to let the people share their information and create a course for their editors, their languages, for example, Eclipse for VS Code, and they can share it with others for free, or they can sell it if it's money motivated. And the other part, I would create an accessibility information for frequently used courses on Udemy or Lynda, and try to provide accessible information for them.
Yep.
Hi, Jonathan. This is Joseph speaking.
Yes, Joseph.
I agree with what people say. I think one aspect we have to take into account, something I think wasn't brought up much. If we are given $25,000 from Hostman Prize, I think one of the things that we do need to invest in is some kind of a research into training people to advocate for themselves. Of course, we have to let people learn that we have to interact with content that's designed for sighted peers.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a question of how do we make that translatable to people who cannot see the screen or who have limited vision? But I think the bigger problem that we have to tackle in research in the end is how do we teach coders, blind coders, to talk to sighted peers in a way that allows communication, two-way communication to flow. Because one thing that I think that's sort of not mentioned a lot is training people to advocate for themselves. Because when they go out to code, or when they work with in pair programming, for example, one of the ways that will have an impact is, at least to me, is having coders advocate for things that they do need in a way that allows communication to flow. So I think one thing we do need to keep in mind, I think in some aspect, given that we could have this money, 20,000 plus, is perhaps coming up with some kind of a research that's data-driven that allows us to think about ways to train coders so that they can also not only code, but also to advocate for themselves. Because some of the recent improvements in accessibility came because of advocacy by blind people. So I think that's one area of research that we could pursue, given that we get this funding, if that's the case.
Thank you. I'd like to ask if there are people who haven't yet spoken on this question who have a burning need, because I would like to then move into sort of next steps. And we are not going to decide today, obviously, what specifically might be happening, but that's what I'll address in a moment. So are there other ideas that people wanted to get out there that have not?
This is Hangyeon, and I would
Yes.
like to add one more thing. Maybe somebody has already said similar idea. I heard it, but so in my experience, the tools that we use to program and all the documentation and these, they are getting better and better. So, for example, using Visual Studio Code, we can navigate the structure of the program quite easily. But and there are a lot more materials talking about these in Bookshare. You can find some documentation about those. But the problem these days is, as somebody said, there are too much information. So Probably what I would like to do is develop a course that actually does common themes, common programming themes. Like these days in large corporates, Google or Facebook or these Amazon, Microsoft, these companies, how they do programming, they are quite similar. I mean, using similar editors and using all the Git or some kind of source control system and how to debug. So those kind of things, we have to decide some programming language and the topics, but if we can come up with some widely acceptable topics and tools, and we can collect all the best practices in terms of accessibility things. So if we can develop some good course curriculum, and then we can later we can extend it to different topics or programming languages, different tools and so on. So it will be nice to have at least one well-developed course training for visually impaired.
Thank you.
Programming.
Yep. One more comment, anybody have a thought?
I have one, Diogo. Regarding, I think it was the person previous to the last one, about advocating. I also think that the investment should go in that direction, because yes, there are some specific things to blind coders, but like the bugs, the problems we have, some of them we can also learn from our sighted colleagues, and like investing on improving the accessibility of existing platforms would help us a lot, and not create like a ghetto for the blind programmers in one side and sighted programmers in the other.
Right.
I think we should avoid that split and to capitalize on what is already existent.
Thank you. That's a really great comment to kind of wrap up discussion on today, because I think that there are so many things that people have raised here, you know, and I hear already that some people like one and you know, somebody else is like, I want this, and somebody else is like, oh, we definitely don't want to do that. And I think that question about what are we creating that's specifically for blind people, and how do we do that in a way that doesn't sort of further marginalize or segregate blind people. So I think that's all great. Yeah, that's all great stuff to think about. I want to just kind of wrap up and tell you guys a few things about timing and my thoughts about next steps. Is that, and I tried to put it in the chat, I'm not sure if it came through, so somebody can let me know. If not, a link to the YouTube, if you haven't already seen it, to go and look at my 90-second pitch that I did for the Holman Prize. And if you're so inclined, please like it on YouTube. The person who gets the most likes will automatically advance to a semi-finalist position, but they will also be picking other projects. And in my mind, I think we have a good chance of at least advancing to the next level of things. And
it came through, Janet. It came through.
Great, thank you. Good. So, so what I'm thinking is that they have said that at the end of April, people will be notified if they have been chosen to move on. And then there is a more detailed written proposal that needs to be given. It doesn't have to say exactly everything that's going to happen, but it does need to kind of give a hint of the direction and talk about the budget and what the money would be used for and things like that. So, and that, I'm guessing, but I could be wrong, will probably be due, you know, like a month or a few weeks after the end of it. So sometime in May or by the end of May. I'm assuming that will need to go in, and it has to be fairly concise. And like I said, it doesn't have to have all the details, and things can change if you come, you know, if you start in one direction and it's like, this is clearly not going to work, you know, but that's my understanding of the timing. So my thought would be that we could certainly kind of, what I'd like to do after today, and that's why I was asking everybody to put their email in, is I'd like to do a little bit of a survey. I could send out like a Google form survey to everyone, where you can express what you are most interested in. I'll take these ideas that were put out as the brainstorms, and you know, you can kind of say which ones you are interested in, which ones you think you could contribute something to, and things like that. So that would be my idea of a next step until I find out whether this is advancing. Of course, even if it doesn't advance in the Holman Prize, doesn't mean that this has to stop. But then we'll have a better sense of what we're dealing with, whether, you know, it's all volunteer driven. And full disclosure, I did, I'm very happy about it, but I did just get a job this week, and I will be starting next week a new job. So I will have at least, especially at the beginning when I'm kind of getting up to speed there, I think a little less time. So my thought was to set out the poll and then call people back together the end of April, beginning of May, once, you know, I have some data from that I can share, and once we know what's happening with Holman, and then people can decide, you know, we'll at that point be trying to decide, okay, what's the direction we're going? And I might throw out some of the thoughts I have based on, you know, what feedback I get and kind of my own sense of what would be feasible. And then people can kind of decide, do they want to be part of that? Do they want to help with it? Or what do they want to do? And help decide, make the final decision so that then the proposal can be written and submitted. And then we'll find out probably in June or July whether or not it gets the prize. And I believe September, they have a training. And then after that is when you get started on your Holman year. So it runs from October through the following September. And the other thing I'd like to say is that I'm not at all foreclosing. I mean, it's a democracy and a free economy, obviously. So if people have ideas that they want to pursue, you know, go for it. For example, if the mailing list thinks it wants to transition to something else, I saw some debate, and there were people who thought there were pros to that, cons to that, that sort of thing. So that's certainly a discussion that people can raise if they're interested in that, or if they have the power on that group to make such recommendations or such changes. So that's something that could be happening in the meantime if there are things in your own area that you can follow up on. So those are my thoughts. I will get everybody, again, I will send out a list with all the names and email addresses that have been provided, unless you've told me in the chat that you don't want your name and information shared. And I can still keep you on the list, even if you don't want your info shared, to come to different upcoming meetings. And then I will send out a survey maybe a week or so before I'm able to do that. And then we'll kind of go from there. We'll stay in touch. And if there are other people you know who want to get hooked in, feel free to send them. I also did put my email address further up in the chat, or you can also just send a message if you're on the Program L mailing list, send a message to me and I can get back with you privately or whatever. So is there anything else that anyone would like to say as we wrap up today? Any other comments?
I just want to say thank you very much, Jonna, for setting this up.
Yeah, this has been a great experience for me, and I get the feeling that others, it's really been valuable too. So thank you all for coming. Any other thoughts or comments?
Did you say that that we're gonna wait until you find out about the if you progress to the next level before we meet again or anything?
Probably before we meet in person again, at least from my point of view. If somebody else wants to organize something, that's fine. But from my point of view, I'd probably be waiting until then.
Can you throw that link for that YouTube video back in the chat? It got lost in all the messages.
Okay, let me try to do that.
Why don't you email it to the list too?
I can do
I
that.
don't.
Yeah.
Eric.
Agreed.
Oh, and
Because Eric,
Eric,
I'm not seeing the chat right now.
right. Also, Eric, you're on the listserv, right?
Yes.
On the program L. If you could just send me your
Yes.
email address on there or to me privately at jana.schroeder@comcast.net, then I can get you.
All right, I'll post it on the list.
Okay, perfect. I just
So
didn't know
I
if you were
post
okay with
every
that.
once in a blue moon on there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, my clock is striking the hour, so I think we did great. Thank you all so much for coming, and really appreciate it. And let's stay in touch, and we'll continue talking about this. Great beginning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Oh, and I'll also be
Goodbye.
figuring out how to do the posting a link so that people can listen to the audio. I have not done that before, so if somebody knows how to do that, email me and let me know. I can figure